The U.S. Vanguard drifted through the silent expanse of space, its hull battered and scarred from the failed raid. The ship's once proud fleet had been decimated, and the remaining survivors, shattered, bruised, and exhausted, had little left to fight for. The Thraxians had been relentless, overwhelming Earth's last defense with superior technology, sheer numbers, and unwavering determination. Humanity's alliance of colonies had shattered, and Earth itself had become little more than a smoking ruin, helpless under the shadow of an alien empire. Captain Evelyn Ward stood alone in the command center, staring at the glowing holographic map before her. The Thraxian fleet was still out there, and she could feel the weight of their presence like a predator closing in on its prey. A faint, bitter laugh escaped her lips. The mission had seemed simple at first: destroy the Starforge, sever the Thraxian supply line. But nothing had gone as planned. She had led her crew into the heart of the Thraxian armada, hoping to catch them off guard, but the enemy had anticipated their every move. The Vanguard had barely made it out alive, and now only a handful of ships remained from the initial fleet. "What's left to fight for, Captain?" Lieutenant Turner's voice broke through the silence, sharp with frustration. He stood behind her, arms crossed, his eyes filled with a mix of weariness and despair. The others had already begun preparing for their retreat, their faces hollow with grief. Ward didn't turn to face him. She couldn't. Not yet. The enormity of the situation hung in the air like a suffocating fog. "We fight for survival, Turner. For every human still out there," she said quietly, but even as the words left her lips, she knew how hollow they sounded. Survival was becoming increasingly impossible. The Thraxians had the Starforges, ancient, near-immovable weapons capable of producing endless fleets of warships. Without a way to destroy them, humanity's chances were slim. A loud crackling noise came over the comms, followed by the strained voice of Commander Harris. "Captain, the last of our supply ships. They're not going to make it back. We've got barely enough fuel to get to the next sector, let alone mount another attack." Ward's heart sank. The reality of their situation was sinking in, and it hurt more than any battle wound she had ever suffered. She closed her eyes for a brief moment. They had one chance left, one shot to turn the tide, but it was a long shot at best. "Prepare the Vanguard for immediate departure. We're heading to the rendezvous point." She knew the risk. The rendezvous point wasn't a safe haven. It was a last-ditch attempt to regroup with the remnants of humanity's fleet, a coalition of ships that were as scattered and beaten as the Vanguard. But even as they moved toward it, a sinking feeling gnawed at Ward's gut. She had seen the reports. The Thraxians were coming for Earth, and this time, there would be no escape. "Captain," Turner said again, his voice barely a whisper, "do you think we can win this?" Ward's eyes opened, the weight of the question pressing down on her chest. The truth was, she wasn't sure. But she had to give them something. Hope, if nothing else. "We'll find a way. We always do." It was a lie, but it was the only one she could offer. For now, it was enough to keep them moving forward. The moon's surface was bathed in a cold, gray light as Captain Evelyn Ward stepped out of the shuttle, her boots crunching against the dust. The hum of the engines faded behind her, and a chilling silence filled the air. This was no ordinary meeting. Humanity's last hope for survival was now pinned on a plan that could either save them or lead to their complete destruction. The leaders of Earth, once united, now sat in small, isolated groups, their faces weary, their eyes heavy with the weight of failure. Ward made her way toward the central command bunker, a series of underground chambers built to withstand the worst of the alien bombardments. Inside, representatives from every surviving human faction gathered, all of them looking for a way out of the mess they'd found themselves in. The walls of the bunker were lined with maps, flashing lights, and communication screens, but the room was still filled with a palpable sense of hopelessness. "Captain Ward," General Stokes said as she entered. He was a tall, grizzled man with a face that had seen more battles than he cared to count. He offered a tired salute before gesturing for her to take a seat at the table. "Glad you could make it." We've been discussing our options. Ward nodded but didn't sit. We don't have time to waste, General. What's the plan? Stokes didn't mince words. It's simple. We're outgunned and outnumbered. The Thraxians control the Starforges. We have no supply lines. If we don't strike back soon, we'll be wiped out, one sector at a time. Earth is already lost. We need something more. A weapon, a miracle, hell, anything that could give us a chance. Ward felt her chest tighten as the weight of the situation settled in. Earth was already a graveyard. She had known it from the moment they'd lost the last major battle, but hearing it said aloud by someone else made it feel all the more real. What's this miracle you're talking about? Stokes motioned toward a holomap. The map shifted, zooming in on a distant asteroid field. We've been working with some of the salvaged alien tech from our last operation. A group of engineers found something. An experimental warship that uses a hybrid of human tech and alien technology, something no one's ever seen before. They call it the Retribution. It's not just another ship. It's our best shot at turning the tide. Ward leaned over the table, studying the projections. The ship, though still in the early stages of construction, was unlike anything she'd ever seen. It was sleek, designed for speed and precision, a stark contrast to the hulking warships of the Thraxians. But more than that, its systems had been infused with alien tech, enabling it to potentially bypass the Thraxians' defense grids. "Where is it?" Ward asked, her voice cold and decisive. "Under construction at the Enclave," Stokes replied, his voice carrying a hint of hope. "But it's not ready. We need time. Time we don't have." Ward crossed her arms. "How long until it can be fully operational?" "We think it'll take at least 3 months," one of the engineers chimed in. "Maybe less if we push the crews harder." Ward's mind raced. 3 months. 3 months before humanity could even consider striking back. The Thraxians would have wiped out the last remnants of their forces by then. But then something stirred within her, a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. "We don't have 3 months," she said, her voice gaining strength. "We take the fight to them now. We weaken their supply lines, disrupt their fleets, and buy ourselves the time we need." Stokes eyed her warily. "With what? A handful of ships. We've barely got enough to defend ourselves, let alone go on the offensive." Ward's gaze hardened. "We'll use every ship we have left. We don't need to win every battle. We need to make the Thraxians realize that we're still a threat. We make them fear us again." She turned to the gathered leaders. "This isn't just about the Retribution. It's about showing the galaxy that humanity is still fighting. If we can rally the colonies, if we can prove that we have the will to survive, we'll get the reinforcements we need." There was a long pause, the silence thick and tense. Then General Stokes nodded slowly. "All right, Captain. You're right. Let's start planning. We don't have time to waste either." As Ward looked around the room, she saw the flicker of resolve in the eyes of the people who had been through so much already. Maybe this was the turning point. Maybe, against all odds, humanity could strike back. "Prepare for war," she said, her voice resolute. "The fight for our future starts now." The U.S. Vanguard was barely holding together, its engine sputtering as it made its way through the asteroid field, a maze of floating rocks and debris. Captain Evelyn Ward stood at the command console, eyes narrowed as she studied the map of their target. The plan was risky, but it was their only chance to buy the time they needed. The Thraxians had been relying on a massive supply depot located on an uncharted moon in a distant system, one that was critical to their war effort. If they could take it out, it would cripple the Thraxian fleet's ability to repair and resupply, at least for a while. That was all they needed. Time. "Status report, Lieutenant Turner," Ward asked, her voice steady despite the tension coiling inside her. Turner's voice crackled over the comms. "Shields at 75%, Captain. Engines are barely functioning at full power, but we'll make it. Our window of opportunity is closing fast. We'll hit them before they can reinforce the depot." Ward nodded, her gaze shifting to the other warships in the fleet. There were only a handful of them left, small, nimble ships that had once been part of Earth's expansive defense force. Now, they were all that remained. The fleet had already lost nearly half its ships in previous skirmishes, but these survivors were determined to fight to the end. "All ships, hold formation," Ward ordered, her voice firm. "We make our move now, or we never get another chance." The fleet slipped deeper into the asteroid field, the small ships moving with precision through the narrow passages between massive rocks. Ward's heart pounded in her chest. The Thraxians were not stupid. They would be expecting an attack soon, and they would be ready. They always were. But the human fleet had one advantage. The Thraxians underestimated their unpredictability, and that would be their undoing. A sudden flash of light caught Ward's eye. The sensors had picked up a signal. Incoming. Thraxian fleet, 5 ships, large warships, closing fast. The voice of the sensor officer crackled through the comms. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Ward barked, her grip tightening on the edge of the console. She could feel the weight of every decision pressing down on her. "All ships, get into attack positions. We need to neutralize their defenses before they can regroup." The Thraxians weren't playing around. The first salvo of missiles came faster than Ward could react, slamming into the Vanguard's shields with a deafening roar. The ship lurched, alarms blaring as the lights flickered. "Shields at 40%. The damage officer shouted. Ward barely registered the report. "Return fire. Take out their lead ship. Now." Her fleet's smaller ships moved with surgical precision, launching a volley of high-velocity plasma bolts at the lead Thraxian warship. The shots hit their mark, rupturing the enemy ship's outer hull. But the Thraxians weren't finished. The remaining warships launched counterattacks, and the asteroid field erupted into chaos as both sides exchanged fire. Ward's pulse quickened, her mind calculating every move, every angle. The Thraxians were a step ahead at every turn, but Ward had something they didn't: human ingenuity. As the Vanguard ducked behind an asteroid for cover, Ward glanced at her tactical officer. "Can we blind them with an EMP blast?" The officer hesitated but nodded. "It'll disable their sensors temporarily, but it'll also leave us exposed." Ward didn't hesitate. "Do it. Now." A moment later, a blinding pulse of energy shot from the Vanguard's main cannon, blanketing the area in a wave of electromagnetic disruption. The Thraxian ships faltered, their sensors flickering and scrambling as they momentarily lost sight of their targets. "Now's our chance," Ward shouted. "All ships, go for their engines." The human fleet surged forward, firing relentlessly at the Thraxian warship's engines and vital systems. The Thraxians retaliated fiercely, but their disoriented state gave the humans a crucial advantage. One by one, the Thraxian warships began to falter. A massive explosion rocked one of them, sending it spiraling out of control as its reactor core detonated. Ward grinned, but it was short-lived. A new wave of Thraxian reinforcements appeared on the far side of the asteroid field, their massive battleships emerging from the shadows. "New target. Take out their supply depot. We need to complete the mission now," Ward commanded, her voice cold with resolve. "We're outnumbered, but we're not out of options. Stay focused." The battle raged on, and the fleet's remaining ships closed in on the depot, their movements swift and coordinated. The Thraxians were relentless, but the humans had something they never expected: the will to fight no matter the odds. As Ward's ship neared the supply depot, she felt the surge of adrenaline in her veins. It was do or die now. There was no retreat. "Fire the main cannons, full power," she ordered. The Vanguard's weapons unleashed a deafening roar, sending a blast of concentrated energy straight into the heart of the Thraxian supply depot. The explosion was massive, lighting up the asteroid field like a miniature sun. Debris rained down as the depot collapsed in on itself, cutting off one of the Thraxians' primary supply lines. Ward watched the chaos unfold on the screen, the explosion sending shockwaves through the remaining Thraxian ships. A flicker of hope ignited within her. They had done it. For now, at least they had scored a victory. But as the battle subsided and the fleet limped away from the site, Ward knew it wasn't over. This war was just beginning. The victory was short-lived. After the successful strike against the Thraxian supply depot, humanity's fleet had managed to escape into deep space, breathing a collective sigh of relief. The attack had disrupted their enemy's logistics and given the rebellion a temporary advantage. But the Thraxians were not a force that would remain passive for long. Captain Evelyn Ward stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, watching the stars flicker by as they moved through the quiet expanse. The battle had taken its toll. The ship was battered, and the crew was exhausted. But as she glanced at the faces of her officers, she knew they wouldn't quit. Not now, not when there was a chance to strike back. "We've got a moment," Lieutenant Turner said as he approached her, his voice weary but determined. "The crew needs a break, Captain. We're running on fumes here." Ward nodded slowly. "I know, Turner. We've all earned it, but we can't afford to rest for long. The Thraxians won't let us off that easy." Her words proved prophetic. It didn't take long for the enemy to retaliate. 2 days after the attack on the supply depot, the first wave of Thraxian warships arrived in the sector. They came in full force, 5 capital ships accompanied by several smaller destroyers. Their presence was a massive shock. The sheer size of the fleet told Ward everything she needed to know. The Thraxians weren't just angry, they were planning to crush the rebellion once and for all. "Alert! Thraxian fleet detected. They're heading straight for us," the sensor officer reported, panic creeping into his voice. Ward's heart skipped a beat. The odds were overwhelming. They were barely enough to fight off a single Thraxian warship, let alone an entire armada. But retreat was not an option. They had no more time to waste. The human fleet had to strike before the Thraxians could regroup. "All ships, prepare for combat," Ward barked. "We're going to make them regret underestimating us." The Vanguard turned sharply, aligning with the rest of the human fleet, which was scattered across several light years. But before they could engage, the Thraxian ships deployed their fighters, sleek, fast crafts that whizzed through space with terrifying precision. "Incoming fighter swarm, Captain," Lieutenant Turner shouted. "They're surrounding us." Ward gritted her teeth. The Thraxian tactics were brutal, designed to overwhelm and crush any resistance. The human fleet was small and fragmented. They couldn't afford to waste any advantage. "Focus on those fighters first," she ordered. "We need to clear the skies before we engage their capital ships." The battle erupted in an instant. The human fleet, still reeling from their previous mission, found themselves caught in a vicious dogfight. The Thraxian fighters darted in and out of the fire, their advanced targeting systems proving a nightmare for the human pilots. Every moment was chaos, with ships dodging, firing, and evading as explosions lit up the space around them. Ward watched the battle unfold with a cold focus. She could feel the weight of every decision pressing down on her. Their only hope was to weaken the Thraxians enough to make them hesitate, to force them to fight a war on multiple fronts. If they could hold their ground, they might just have a shot. "Deploy countermeasures," Ward ordered, gripping the armrest of her chair. "We need to buy time for our remaining ships to rally." The Vanguard's weapon systems unleashed a hail of energy blasts, taking out several Thraxian fighters. But the enemy capital ships were closing in fast, their massive energy cannons charging up for a devastating strike. "Shields at 30%, Captain," the damage officer shouted. Ward's stomach churned. The Vanguard was one direct hit away from being reduced to space debris. Yet she stood firm, unwilling to back down. "We're not going down without a fight," she muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. The Thraxians fired first. A massive blast hit the Vanguard's shields, knocking the ship off course and sending crew members tumbling as the ship rocked violently. "Damage report," Ward shouted, holding on as the ship shuddered. "Shields are holding. For now. "We've lost power to the aft engines," the officer replied. "We don't have much time," Ward said, her voice tight with determination. "We need to break their formation. Take out their lead ship now." Her crew responded with swift precision, coordinating their attack as one. The remaining human ships maneuvered around the Thraxian fleet, focusing all firepower on the lead capital ship. The Vanguard's cannons fired relentlessly, striking at the weak points of the Thraxian vessel. For a moment, it seemed as though the Thraxians would break. The lead ship's shields flickered, then collapsed under the onslaught. "We've got a chance," Turner called out, excitement rising in his voice. But just as it seemed like victory was within reach, the Thraxians retaliated with a fury that turned the tide. The remaining capital ships fired their massive energy weapons, obliterating one of the human ships in a single shot. The shockwave sent debris flying, and the remaining fleet scattered in all directions. Ward gripped the console, her knuckles white. The Thraxians were relentless. There would be no easy victories here. "All ships, disengage. Fall back to the rendezvous point," Ward commanded, her voice sharp. "We live to fight another day." As the human fleet retreated into the void of space, Ward's mind raced. They had taken a major hit, but they were still alive. For now, that was enough. But she knew one thing for sure. The Thraxians would not stop. They would come again, stronger, and this time, humanity would need to be ready. The Vanguard limped through the empty expanse of space, its hull battered, its crew exhausted. The retreat from the Thraxian counteroffensive had been harrowing. Several ships had been lost, and the rest of the fleet had barely made it to the designated rendezvous point. But as Captain Evelyn Ward stood on the bridge, she knew they were not out of options yet. "Status report," Ward said, her voice calm, though the weight of recent events hung over her like a storm cloud. Lieutenant Turner, standing at the tactical console, glanced up. "We've lost 2 more ships, Captain. The Aegis and Thunderstrike didn't make it, but the rest of us have patched up as best we can. We're still functional, just not at full strength. We've got a few days before the Thraxians regroup, and we need to make the most of it." Ward's jaw clenched. Every day spent hiding in the shadows made the Thraxians stronger and humanity weaker. They had to act soon, before the Thraxians had the time to strike again with full force. "I've already initiated the emergency protocol," said Commander Harris, stepping forward. "We've begun reaching out to the scattered human colonies. The message is simple. We fight. We fight for Earth, for survival. Some are responding. Small factions, but it's something." Ward felt a spark of hope flicker within her. Earth had fallen, but the colonies were still standing, scattered though they were. If they could unite, even just a little, they might stand a chance. "Keep pushing those messages out, Harris. Get everyone we can on board. We can't waste time waiting for reinforcements. We need to hit the Thraxians again. Hard." "We've got a problem, though," Turner interjected. "We're still looking at the Thraxian fleet, now regrouped. Their Starforge is fully operational again, and it's capable of launching entire fleets of ships. The longer we wait, the more ships we're going to be up against." Ward's eyes narrowed as she stared out the viewports, the stars beyond offering no comfort. The battle was relentless, and the Thraxians had the power to wipe out everything humanity had left. But there was something else. The small victory they had achieved by disrupting the Thraxian supply line hadn't gone unnoticed. The question was whether they could capitalize on it before the Thraxians could regroup. "I've been thinking about that," Ward said, turning back to face her crew. "We need to hit their Starforge. We've already shown them we can get through their defenses. If we can get close enough, we can disrupt its operations again. Maybe even destroy it." Turner's eyes widened. That's suicide, Captain. The Starforge is guarded by an entire armada, and it's surrounded by an impenetrable defense grid. We'd need to pull off a miracle." "Then we make our own miracle," Ward replied with quiet determination. "We'll use the asteroid field. We'll hit them from the shadows. They won't expect us to strike again so soon. We won't give them a chance to prepare." Commander Harris shook his head. "It's a risky move, Captain, but it might be the only option we have left. If we do this, we need to be ready for whatever comes after. There's no turning back." Ward's eyes met his, her gaze unwavering. "We don't have a choice. We strike at the heart of the Thraxian war machine, or we die trying." The decision was made. They would launch their assault on the Starforge, a final desperate strike. It was a gamble, one that could either turn the tide in humanity's favor or lead to total annihilation. As the crew began preparing for the mission, Ward stood silently for a moment, gazing out at the dark void of space. She had always known this war was going to cost them everything. But if they could destroy the Starforge, if they could disrupt the Thraxians' ability to create endless warships, it would give humanity a fighting chance. Turning to Lieutenant Turner, she spoke with a quiet but resolute voice. "Make sure we have everything ready. This mission is our last shot. If we don't succeed, there's no coming back." Turner nodded grimly, his face set in determination. "Understood, Captain." As the preparations began in earnest, Ward couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice, teetering between life and death. But one thing was clear: humanity had fought for survival every step of the way, and they wouldn't stop now. The Vanguard had been outfitted with every bit of firepower they could muster. The remaining ships in the fleet had been hastily retrofitted with experimental tech, scavenged from the wreckage of previous battles. Every inch of their hulls had been reinforced. The final assault on the Thraxian Starforge was set into motion, and there was no turning back. Captain Evelyn Ward stood at the command console, her eyes locked on the star map before her. The coordinates for the Starforge were locked in, the battle plan was in place, and the crew was ready. But beneath her calm exterior, anxiety churned in her chest. This wasn't just a final strike, it was their last hope. "All ships report in," she said, her voice steady but full of purpose. Lieutenant Turner's voice came through the comms almost immediately. "The fleet is in position, Captain. We've got the element of surprise. They won't see us coming until we're right on top of them." "Good," Ward replied, nodding. "Stay on course. We hit the Starforge with everything we've got. Then get out. We won't have much time before their reinforcements catch up to us." A sharp beep interrupted the quiet hum of the bridge. It was the sensor officer. "Captain, incoming signal. It's the Thraxian fleet. Looks like they're already mobilizing. They're heading straight for the Starforge, and it's only a matter of time before they detect us." Ward clenched her fists. The Thraxians weren't going to make this easy. Their relentless nature was something she had come to expect, but it still felt like the walls were closing in. "Adjust course," she ordered. "We'll go in from the far side of the asteroid field, using the natural terrain to hide our approach. Make sure the fleet stays in tight formation. No stragglers." "Understood," Turner replied. The tension on the bridge was palpable as the fleet maneuvered through the field. The small ships, agile and faster than the Thraxian behemoths, threaded carefully between massive asteroids, their engines humming softly as they crept toward their target. Ward's heart pounded in her chest as she reviewed the plan once more. The Thraxian Starforge was a massive structure, its surface lined with defense platforms, shield generators, and docking bays. Getting close enough to do any real damage would be nearly impossible. But if they could disable the generators, even temporarily, the fleet would have a chance. Without the Starforge operational, the Thraxians wouldn't be able to keep up their constant barrage of reinforcements. As they neared the Starforge's position, Ward's voice cut through the tense silence. "Prepare for the first phase of the assault. We hit their shields, then target the main generators. Make it fast. Our window is small." Her crew responded swiftly, each person moving with precision. The Vanguard's weapons powered up, and the other ships followed suit, their weapons systems primed for the strike. "Shields at maximum strength," the tactical officer reported. "Lock onto the target," Ward said. "On my mark." The seconds felt like hours. Ward's hand hovered over the activation panel, her mind running through the countless calculations, the risks. If they failed, there would be no retreat. The Thraxians would come for them with everything they had. There was only one chance to make this work. "Mark!" Ward shouted. The first volley of plasma fire tore through the silence of space, hitting the Starforge's shields with a thunderous impact. The Thraxian defenses flared brightly, absorbing the initial blast. But the human fleet was relentless, firing continuously as they moved in. Shields weakening on the Starforge. The tactical officer called out, "We're making a dent, Captain." Ward's pulse quickened. It was working. They were getting through. "Keep up the pressure," she barked. "We need those generators offline. Target the core." The fleet fired in perfect synchronization, every shot aimed at the Starforge's central core. The massive structure groaned under the assault, its shield generators flickering as they struggled to hold. The Thraxian ships around it scrambled to retaliate, but the human fleet was already in motion, weaving through the defense platforms and avoiding the deadly counterattacks. "Almost there," the sensor officer called. Targeting systems locked on to the core generator. One final push. Ward's heart raced. They were on the brink. If they could destroy the core generator, it would cripple the Starforge for a significant amount of time. But it had to be perfect. One mistake and the fleet would be obliterated. "Fire," Ward commanded. A final, coordinated volley of energy blasts rained down on the Starforge's core. The explosion was blinding. For a moment, the entire battlefield seemed to vanish into a wall of white light. The shockwave rippled out through space, shaking the ships of the human fleet. "Direct hit," the tactical officer shouted. "The core is down. Shields are failing." Ward let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "It's done. Now let's get the hell out of here." The fleet quickly adjusted course, weaving through the chaos they had just unleashed. But the battle was far from over. The Thraxians would come for them with fury, but for now, humanity had delivered a blow they had never expected. As the Vanguard and its allies escaped, Ward allowed herself a brief moment of relief. The war was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, there was a glimmer of hope. The escape from the Starforge's destruction was chaotic, but the human fleet had done it. They had struck at the heart of the Thraxian war machine, and the core generators of the Starforge were now in ruins. As the fleet retreated into the safety of deep space, the destruction of the massive Thraxian structure loomed large in their wake, a small but critical victory in a war that had seemed hopeless. Captain Evelyn Ward stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, staring out at the stars. The debris from the Starforge explosion had scattered across the sector, and the vastness of space felt strangely empty. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to relax. They had pulled off a miracle, but there was no time to celebrate. Not yet. "Damage report," Ward said, her voice calm but strained with exhaustion. Lieutenant Turner looked up from his console. "We've taken some hits, Captain. The Vanguard's hull is holding together, but we've lost some vital systems. Navigation, shields, and our long-range communications are down. We're also low on supplies. The fleet is in similar condition, but we're alive. For now." Ward nodded, her expression grim. "Keep the fleet together. We can't risk splitting up." "Understood," Turner replied. "The Thraxians will be back in full force soon. They won't let this go unanswered." Ward's thoughts raced. The Thraxians weren't going to give up just because the Starforge was crippled. It would take them time to rebuild, but time was something humanity didn't have. The victory was significant, but it was only one battle in a much larger war. "We need to send out a distress signal," Commander Harris suggested, stepping forward. "We need reinforcements, and we need them fast. There are still a lot of scattered colonies out there, and some might have the firepower to help us." Ward considered the suggestion for a moment. The fleet was in no condition to fight another full-scale battle, let alone take on a reinvigorated Thraxian force. But Harris was right. They needed more ships, more manpower, more resources. Without reinforcements, they'd be easy targets for the Thraxian armada. "I'll authorize the signal," Ward said. "Get it out to every human colony we can reach. If they want to survive, they need to come now." As the fleet began sending out the distress calls, Ward's thoughts turned inward. The war had taken everything from them: their homes, their families, their Earth. And now, even in the midst of their first victory, she knew that the battle wasn't over. The Thraxians would retaliate, and it would be brutal. The quiet hum of the Vanguard's engines filled the silence of the bridge as Ward's mind worked through the next steps. She had to stay ahead of the Thraxians, stay one step ahead of the madness. The mission was still clear. Humanity had to fight. They had to survive. "Captain, we've received a signal," Turner said, interrupting her thoughts. "It's from one of the colonies, Pallas Station. They've confirmed they can mobilize a fleet, but it'll take them several days to get here." Ward's heart skipped a beat. Pallas Station was one of the largest independent human colonies, and they had long been rumored to have a sizable military force, hidden away for moments just like this. The arrival of their fleet could change everything. It could turn the tide of the war in humanity's favor. "Get us to Pallas Station," Ward said, her voice filled with resolve. "We've bought ourselves some time, but not much. Let's make sure we're ready when they get here." The fleet adjusted course, heading toward Pallas Station as quickly as they could. But even with reinforcements on the horizon, Ward knew that the Thraxians would soon retaliate with everything they had. The next battle would be the hardest yet. As the ships of humanity's scattered fleet moved together, unified for the first time in ages, Ward felt a renewed sense of purpose. The odds were still stacked against them, but humanity had done the impossible once. They would do it again. And this time, they wouldn't stop until they reclaimed their future. The journey to Pallas Station was tense. The human fleet moved cautiously through deep space, each ship battered and worn from the previous battle. Every member of the crew, from the seasoned officers to the youngest recruits, could feel the weight of what was to come. The Thraxians were relentless, and with the destruction of the Starforge, they would no doubt be more determined than ever to crush humanity. Captain Evelyn Ward stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, her gaze fixed on the dark expanse of space ahead. The stars seemed distant, as though they were mocking her and her crew. Despite the victory they had won, there was no real triumph in the air, only the quiet, looming certainty that this would not be the end of the war. "Not yet, Captain," Lieutenant Turner said, his voice filled with the same quiet tension that permeated the bridge. "We've picked up Thraxian signals. They're mobilizing. Fast. We don't have much time." Ward turned to face him, her expression unwavering. "How soon until they reach us?" "Within 2 days, if we're lucky," Turner replied. "They're moving a large fleet into position. The Starforge may be down, but they've got other ways to wage war." Ward's mind raced. 2 days. That was all they had. The Pallas Station fleet would need time to mobilize, and even then it wouldn't be enough to match the full strength of the Thraxian armada. They would be outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting for their very survival. "We need to fortify our position," Ward said, her voice firm with command. "Set up defensive measures. We can't just wait for reinforcements to arrive. We need to hold them off long enough for Pallas to reach us." Commander Harris, always the pragmatist, spoke up. "We're spread thin, Captain. We've got no choice but to dig in. But if we do that, we're giving up any hope of an offensive. We'll be stuck defending until reinforcements arrive, or until the Thraxians burn us out." "Then we make sure they can't burn us out," Ward replied. "We're not giving them the chance." For the next several hours, the fleet worked quickly, preparing to turn the asteroid field near Pallas Station into a maze of traps and ambush points. With no Starforge to supply the Thraxians with new warships, they were forced to rely on their existing fleet. But the sheer number of ships in that fleet was staggering. The Vanguard's crew worked tirelessly, reinforcing shields, recalibrating weapons, and ensuring every last fighter was ready to take to the sky. The rest of the fleet, though battered, followed suit. It was a race against time, a final push before humanity faced its greatest battle. As the Thraxians approached, Ward couldn't shake the feeling of being on the edge of something monumental. This would be their last stand, and the stakes were higher than ever. If they failed, the war would be over for humanity. "All ships report in," Ward said, her voice cutting through the tension. Lieutenant Turner's voice came back immediately. "All ships are ready, Captain. We're as prepared as we can be." "Good," Ward said. "We fight together, or we don't fight at all. This is our moment, people. Hold the line." The first wave of Thraxian warships appeared on the horizon, their sleek, menacing forms cutting through the darkness of space. Ward's heart pounded as she saw the enormity of the force approaching. The Thraxians weren't just coming to reclaim their Starforge, they were coming to finish what they had started. And if humanity didn't stop them, they would be lost forever. "Brace for impact," Ward shouted, her voice commanding as the first volley of enemy fire streaked toward them. The space around the fleet erupted into a storm of light and energy. The vanguard shook violently as the first wave of Thraxian fire struck their shields, but they held. The human fleet had prepared well. Now, they would have to prove it. The battle raged on. Humanity's fighters darted through the chaos, targeting Thraxian ships with deadly precision. The human warships fired relentlessly, taking down enemy ships one by one. But for every Thraxian vessel that fell, 2 more seemed to take its place. "We're outnumbered," Lieutenant Turner shouted. "The Thraxian reinforcements are coming in faster than we can handle." Ward gritted her teeth, her resolve hardening. "We hold this position. We fight for every inch. We fight for humanity." As the battle unfolded, Ward could feel the weight of every decision pressing down on her. They were holding their own, but for how long? And could they last long enough for the reinforcements to arrive? The human fleet continued to push back the Thraxians, taking heavy losses but refusing to relent. The odds were impossible, but in that moment, humanity fought like they had nothing left to lose. It wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for everything they had lost. "Captain," Turner said, voice filled with hope, "the Palace Station fleet is here." Ward's eyes lit up as she saw the first of the reinforcements break through the chaos of battle. It was a lifeline, a beacon in the dark. Together, with their new allies, humanity had one last chance to end this war, and they would fight for it until the very end.